Jason Harper never thought he'd own a dog, let alone two massive German shepherds with military-grade training and eyes that had seen war. He was a quiet mechanic in Bozeman, Montana, more comfortable with wrenches than wagging tails. His wife, Sarah, worked as a neonatal nurse and had always loved dogs. But after 3 miscarriages and a tough pregnancy, their focus had shifted entirely to the little girl growing inside her. Then one afternoon in late September, while Jason was picking up brake pads at the local parts store, he spotted the flyer taped to the counter. Retired K9 South need a home. Immediate foster or adoption. Required. 2 German shepherds, brothers, Titan and Bear. The clerk, a fellow veteran, noticed Jason eyeing the flyer. "Those dogs are something else," he said. "Did 3 tours with a handler in Afghanistan. Handler didn't make it back." Jason's stomach tightened. He wasn't sentimental, but he knew what it meant for trained war dogs to lose their person. They didn't just mourn. They waited. They watched. They didn't understand why their whole world was gone. That evening, he showed the flyer to Sarah. She raised her eyebrows. "Dogs? Now," she said, resting a hand on her swollen belly. "I know," Jason replied, "but something about it, I don't know, just feels like they need us." The next day, they drove out to the temporary shelter. As soon as the gate opened, Jason understood. The 2 shepherds weren't barking or pacing like the others. They sat still, side by side, watching everything. Bear was bulkier, with a black saddle and gold undercoat. Titan was leaner, scarred on one leg, eyes sharp and calculating. When Sarah stepped forward, both dogs stood but didn't move. Then, Bear did something unexpected. He trotted over to her. Gently, slowly, he pressed his head against her belly. Jason froze. Sarah didn't move. Titan followed, sitting right beside her, his ears twitching. The handler overseeing the visit, a former K9 cop, tilted his head and smiled faintly. "They've never done that, ever." It took only 15 minutes before Jason and Sarah made the decision. Papers were signed, crates loaded, food instructions written down. By sunset, they were driving home with 2 huge, intimidating dogs in the back of the truck and a baby due in just 6 weeks. At home, things were surprisingly easy. Titan and Bear didn't bark, they didn't jump, they didn't need training. They observed. They adjusted. Still, Sarah remained cautious. She kept a respectful distance as she prepared the nursery. But the dogs followed every movement, never interfering, just watching. When she hung the mobile above the crib, Bear laid down in the doorway. When Jason assembled the changing table, Titan sat in the corner, tail thumping once every few minutes. Then, the night Ella was born, something even stranger happened. While Sarah rested at the hospital, Jason returned home to grab fresh clothes. As he opened the front door, he found both dogs sitting in front of the empty crib. Not on the couch, not in the hallway, just sitting, staring into the nursery. It was as if they already knew. 6 hours later, Jason carried a sleeping Ella inside, swaddled in pink. Sarah walked behind him, shaky but glowing. "Should we wait before letting them meet her?" she asked, hesitating. Before Jason could answer, Bear stood up and approached them slowly. He paused at their feet and sniffed the air, then gently pressed his nose against Ella's blanket. Titan joined him seconds later, sitting down beside Bear, eyes locked on the baby, ears low, tail still. Ella stirred but didn't cry. She let out a little sigh and nestled deeper into Jason's arms, and in that moment, there was a stillness in the house, an unspoken agreement, a pact. Jason looked at Sarah, who was now crying softly. "I think they already love her," she whispered. He nodded. "They chose her, and so it began." The house was quiet outside. A light dusting of snow had begun to fall over the Montana pines, cloaking the world in silence. Inside, warmth filled the Harper home, soft lullabies from a Bluetooth speaker, the faint aroma of lavender oil, and 2 German shepherds lying in the hallway like ancient statues. Sarah had just placed baby Ella in her crib for the night. She'd turned on the baby monitor, kissed her daughter's head, and dimmed the lights to a sleepy golden glow. She tiptoed out of the room, Titan and Bear rising to follow, as they always did. But the silence didn't last. At 2:04 a.m., Ella's first sharp wail shattered the night. Jason shot upright in bed, bleary-eyed, while Sarah reached for her robe. But before either could move, 2 shadows were already in motion. Bear and Titan leapt from the foot of the bed and sprinted toward the nursery, claws barely making a sound on the hardwood. Sarah stumbled after them, heart racing. "Wait," she whispered loudly, fearing the dogs might be overwhelmed or worse, make things worse. But But what she saw when she turned the corner stopped her cold. The two massive shepherds didn't bark or whine. They didn't approach the crib too fast. Instead, they paused just inside the doorway. Titan lay down first, crawling forward on his elbows until he was nose to wood with the crib. Bear stood guard beside it, ears tilted forward, his eyes locked on the baby as if reading her every breath. Ella's cry softened, then stopped. The baby turned her head toward Titan's presence. Her tiny hand reached out, fingers splaying toward the bars. Titan gently stood and pressed his nose between the crib rails, never licking, never nudging, just close enough for her to feel him. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Jason came up behind her and froze. She stopped crying, he said in disbelief. She was screaming just seconds ago, Sarah added, blinking back tears. The dogs remained like that for 20 minutes. Bear lay down, his body stretched along the crib like a living wall. Titan shifted, slightly, always adjusting his position when Ella stirred. Sarah wanted to intervene, say something, anything, but her instincts told her not to. These weren't ordinary dogs. They weren't reacting. They were listening. From that moment, the pattern began. Ella's cries were rare, and when they came, the dogs were always first on the scene, not panic prepared. If her blanket slipped, Titan would pace outside the door until someone fixed it. If she coughed, Bear would nudge the baby monitor with his nose, as if saying, check her. Sarah began documenting the behavior, half out of curiosity, half because no one at work would believe her. She'd show them photos of Bear sitting perfectly still beside the changing table, or Titan lying under Ella's swing like a furry base. Nurses, pediatricians, even her own mother were stunned. This isn't normal dog behavior. One of her colleagues said, it's maternal, or I don't know. Military Jason, who'd served briefly in the Marines, understood it better. They're on mission, he said one evening as he watched Bear escort Sarah and the stroller down the icy sidewalk, nose scanning left and right like a trained sentry. They think she's their responsibility. By the time Ella was 2 months old, the dogs had fully claimed her. They followed her bassinet from room to room. They learned her nap schedule better than her parents. When guests came over, Titan would gently position himself between the stroller and strangers until given permission to relax. It wasn't aggression, it was loyalty, a kind of silent code that spoke louder than any bark ever could. And though Sarah had once feared letting two former police dogs near her newborn, now she found herself unable to sleep unless she heard their faint breaths just outside the door. What had begun as an experimental adoption of two broken dogs was turning into something else entirely. Something sacred, something none of them saw coming. It began with a strange, sharp smell that no one noticed. The heater had kicked on that morning for the first time all winter. Outside, frost covered the porch steps and a thin layer of ice rimmed the trees. Inside, the house was cozy, quiet, and filled with the faint scent of baby lotion and laundry detergent. But Titan wouldn't settle. He paced near the floor vent, slow, deliberate steps. Every few minutes, he paused to sniff at the grates, then looked at the hallway where Ella slept. Bear soon joined him, not pacing, but standing squarely in the hallway, ears back, body tense. Sarah was in the kitchen warming a bottle, oblivious to the quiet alarm going off in the dog's world. Jason had just finished tightening a bolt on the porch railing. It was a calm, ordinary Saturday morning, until at WASN single quotes T. At exactly 10:43 a.m., Sarah dropped the baby bottle. She collapsed against the fridge, knees giving out, vision spinning. Her hand clutched at her chest, but her lungs wouldn't fill. It wasn't pain, it was confusion. A thick dizziness overtook her like fog. Titan barked once, a single, sharp command. Then again, louder, more urgent. Jason heard it, and it was different from anything he'd heard before. When he opened the door, the cold air smacked his face, but he barely noticed. Titan was clawing at the front door. From the inside, bark growing frantic, Jason threw it open, and Titan surged out, grabbing his coat sleeve in his teeth. What the hell? Jason stammered. Titan yanked hard. Jason followed down the steps, into the yard, and then he understood. He couldn't breathe either. The air in the house hadn't just been warm, it was wrong. Jason ran back inside, now panicked. He found Sarah slumped in the hallway, groggy but conscious. He scooped her up, yelling for Bear. The second he did, Bear appeared rushing down the hallway from Ella's room, tail low, eyes wild. Jason bolted toward the nursery. The crib was fine. The baby was okay. But it was what Bear had done that made Jason stop in his tracks. Bear had pulled the nursery rug across the heating vent. The room was cooler than the rest of the house. the vent completely covered, and Bear he had wrapped himself around the crib leg, lying half over the vent with his body, shielding her, not just guarding, blocking the poison. Jason grabbed Ella and ran, Bear sprinting beside him. They burst through the front door just as Titan began barking toward the neighbor's house, calling attention. The ambulance came fast, so did the fire trucks. Carbon monoxide. A slow leak from the furnace's cracked heat exchanger. The alarm had failed. The levels in the house were nearly fatal. The fire chief shook his head in disbelief. If the baby had been in that room 10 more minutes, he trailed off. Sarah sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, holding Ella tight, with Titan's massive head in her lap. Jason stood nearby, petting Bear, who was shivering whether from cold or shock. He couldn't tell. They knew, Jason whispered. They knew before anyone. The paramedic nodded. Some dogs can smell it. But what's wild is how they reacted, like they understood it was dangerous, not just dangerous. Sarah added, still shaken. Lethal. In the days that followed, the story spread through the neighborhood. The fire department installed backup detectors. The local news wanted interviews. But Jason and Sarah declined. This wasn't a headline to them. It was a reminder. Those 2 dogs once left behind, once thought to damage to trust, had recognized a silent killer and reacted with more clarity, loyalty, and bravery than most humans might have. They didn't save themselves, they saved her, and in doing so, they became more than protectors. They became legends. In one quiet house on the edge of a snowy Montana town, a baby girl breathed safely, not because of chance, not because of alarms, but because 2 broken souls had found something pure to protect. By the time Ella turned 8 months old, she had stopped crawling the usual way. Most babies crawled on all 4s, hands and knees, or scooting along the floor. But Ella had adopted a different method. She used Bear. The large German Shepherd would lie beside her during tummy time, his back perfectly flat and wide. Ella would crawl halfway, then hoist herself onto his fur and rest there, giggling as her little fingers gripped tufts of his coat. Bear never flinched. He would simply look up, give a low huff as if amused, and let her stay. Sarah had started filming it every day. She even posted a short video to her parenting blog titled, "Our daughter thinks she's a cub." It wasn't just cute, it was consistent. When Ella tried standing for the first time, she didn't grab the furniture like most babies. She crawled straight toward Titan, who had been lying near the fireplace. She reached for his collar, wrapped her fingers around the thick leather, and began to pull herself upward. Jason held his breath. Titan didn't move, not even a shift. His eyes flicked toward Ella, watching, measuring. Slowly, she rose to her feet, stumbling forward into his shoulder. She squealed in delight, holding herself upright using his body. Did she just? Sarah gasped from the kitchen doorway. She stood. Jason whispered, stunned, with him. That night, the couple sat quietly in bed, watching the baby monitor. Ella had begun crawling toward Titan's bed at night, curling next to him until Jason or Sarah lifted her back into the crib. Titan never stopped her, never moved. They're helping raise her, Sarah said softly. Jason nodded. They're teaching her, guiding her. The changes in Ella weren't just physical, they were emotional. At an age when many babies screamed for attention, Ella was unusually calm. When she dropped a toy, she didn't cry. She looked toward Bear. He'd nudge it back. When she was overwhelmed, she would scoot beside Titan and gently lean on him until she settled. At daycare, it was different. Ella didn't like noise. She didn't like chaos. She didn't respond well to strangers. Sarah would pick her up early, only to find her curled into a corner, quietly humming, fingers twitching like she was reaching for something soft and familiar. The moment they returned home, Bear and Titan would greet her at the door, and her entire demeanor would change. Her smile would bloom, her hands would stretch out, her eyes would brighten. The dogs were her safety, her teachers, too. One morning, when Sarah was cooking breakfast, she heard a heavy thump in the living room. She turned just in time to see Ella taking her first unassisted step, arms outstretched, wobbling, feet barely lifting straight toward Bear's open paws. Jason, who was holding the camera, gasped, "She's walking." Bear didn't move. He didn't even blink. His tail wagged once. Titan, nearby, gave a soft bark, one short burst that Sarah had come to understand meant look. Ella tumbled forward into Bear's chest and started laughing. That video never made it online. It was too precious, too intimate, too raw to share. That afternoon, Jason built a small wooden step outside the front porch so Ella could toddle up to it. During their daily stroller walks, Titan and Bear would flank her, one ahead, one behind. Every walk was like a protective escort. People slowed their cars to stare. Neighbors waved. One older woman clutched her chest and said, "I've never seen anything like it. They treat her like she's theirs." She was. That summer, they traveled to a quiet lake nearby. Jason had hoped to let Ella touch the water for the first time. He set her near the edge of the shore. Crouching just behind her, Titan lay in the shallow water, eyes locked on her every move. Bear paced the tree line behind them. When a duck flapped its wings nearby, startling Ella, she almost tumbled forward, but Titan moved in a blink, placing his paw in front of her knees to catch her fall. She didn't cry. She laughed and splashed his paw with her tiny hand. Even in the water, even at play, the message was always clear. Ella came first, always. It was a bitter January night. The snow had come fast and heavy, piling up on the edges of the Harper porch like cold white armor. Jason had shoveled earlier, but the wind covered his work within hours. The whole neighborhood was asleep except for Titan. He never really slept, not fully dotted to 13 a.m. The house was silent. Ella had been asleep since 8. Sarah was curled up under their thick comforter, while Jason snored softly beside her. But Titan lay in the hallway, just outside the nursery, ears twitching in the dark. Then came the sound, a click, soft, metallic, from the backyard. Titan stood instantly. No growl, no bark, just movements swift and fluid, like a switch flipping. Bear, who had been resting at the foot of Ella's crib, rose at the same moment, eyes wide and body coiled. Jason woke to the strange feeling of motion downstairs. He sat up, blinking at the clock. The house felt wrong, still, but not peaceful, staged. The kind of stillness that comes before something shatters. Suddenly, Titan's bark tore through the silence. It wasn't warning. It was war. Jason threw on a sweatshirt and grabbed the bat he kept near the door. As he rushed down the stairs, Bear bolted past him, heading straight for the kitchen. Then Jason saw it, movement in the dark, a figure outside. Someone was at the window, crouching low, trying to force it open. Jason froze, his chest tightened, breath catching halfway. But he didn't have to act. Titan launched at the glass from inside, teeth bared, snarling with a fury Jason had never heard before. The intruder's silhouette jolted back, stumbling, slipping on the icy deck. Bear smashed against the back door, barking like thunder, lips curled and eyes blazing. Lights flicked on across the neighborhood. Sirens came fast after Sarah dialed 911, voice trembling as she clutched Ella to her chest. But the man was gone by the time the first crews arrived, his footprints the only evidence he'd ever been there. Officer Daniels, a seasoned deputy with a long face and weary eyes, examined the prints in the snow and shook his head. He was close, real close. Jason told him what happened, how the dogs had reacted before the man even touched the door. Daniels just whistled. "I've seen dogs bark, sure, but that was coordination. They were ready." Sarah was still shaking when she looked at Titan, who now lay calmly beside the door, his ears still slightly raised. He positioned himself between the window and Ella's room. She whispered, "Before we even saw anything." Bear nudged her hand, sensing her unease. Sarah crouched to pet him and glanced down the hallway. For the first time in her life, she realized what real security looked like. Not in locks, not in fences. In fur. The next morning, Jason installed motion-activated floodlights and added to new deadbolts. But truthfully, he felt safer knowing Titan and Bear were watching. They hadn't just alerted him, they had moved into action. No hesitation, no fear. He watched the security footage 100 times that week. What stuck with him wasn't the man, it was the dog's behavior. The way Titan used his body to shield the back entrance, and how Bear flanked the hallway, standing in front of Ella's room like a trained bodyguard. It wasn't chaos, it was strategy. They hadn't just reacted, they had protected. The story would have ended there, just another home invasion stopped by barking dogs. But the truth was deeper. What shocked everyone, even the responding deputies, was that Titan had clawed at the exact window being targeted before the man even touched it. How did he know? Jason didn't need an answer. Titan had been trained to detect tension, movement, threats, but Bear had not left Ella's side for hours after, even when the sun came up, even when the danger was long gone. He stayed pressed to the side of her crib like a silent sentry, not because it was his job, because she was his. The moment lasted only 12 seconds. Sarah hadn't even meant to record it. She had just been cleaning up toys from the living room floor, phone in hand, when she glanced up and saw Ella, in her footy pajamas, toddling toward Bear with a half-eaten cracker in her chubby hand. The sun poured in from the bay window, casting a golden halo round them. Share, Bear, Ella said softly. The dog didn't move. He lay on the floor like a statue. Ella reached out and gently placed the cracker on Bear's paw. A beat of silence passed. Then, with the gentlest motion imaginable, Bear leaned forward, took the cracker from her tiny hand, and licked her fingers afterward. Titan, who had been resting nearby, stood up, walked over, and placed his massive paw over Ella's hand as if saying, "She's protected." Sarah didn't cry. She filmed it that evening. She uploaded it to her blog with the title, "This is why we trust them." She didn't expect anything, but by morning, the video had been shared over 80,000 times. By lunchtime, her email inbox had 216 new messages. By dinner, a local news station had left a voicemail requesting an interview. The headline read, "Gentle Giants, retired police dogs adopt baby girl as one of their own." Within 3 days, national outlets picked up the clip, a clip no longer than a sneeze, showing nothing dramatic, just raw affection, unspoken trust, and loyalty between a child and two aging war dogs. And people couldn't stop watching. The comments poured in. "I served in Afghanistan. These dogs don't just obey, they decide who their family is. I lost my canine partner in Iraq. This made me sob. They never forget how to protect. I've never seen anything more pure. She's not just their baby, she's their purpose." Sarah sat at the kitchen table, overwhelmed. As the counter on the video ticked past 3 million views, Jason didn't say much. He just nodded as he watched the footage again. Ella's soft hand, Bear's quiet stillness, Titan's silent approval. They'd seen it all in real life, but seeing it through the world's eyes made it feel even more profound. That weekend, the Harpers were invited to appear on a morning talk show via satellite. Sarah hesitated, worried it would cheapen the bond they had with their dogs. But Jason convinced her. "Let people see what loyalty looks like." The host asked light-hearted questions, but then, she leaned in and asked something real. "What do you think these dogs see when they look at your daughter?" Jason answered without hesitation, "They see someone to live for." The clip made it to prime time, but it wasn't the fame or attention that changed their lives. It was the letters. Hundreds of them, parents of autistic children, wrote in, sharing stories of their service dogs' silent understanding. Soldiers and veterans sent patches and coins, honoring Titan and Bear for continued duty. One handwritten letter arrived from a Gold Star widow who had lost her husband and his canine partner overseas. It simply read, "You didn't adopt dogs. You were chosen to carry forward something sacred. Thank you for letting us witness it." Sarah wept when she read it. One evening, Jason opened the front door to find a folded flag sitting on the porch. No note, no name, just the American flag, clean and crisp, resting atop a dog collar bearing the name Zeus. Someone had paid quiet tribute, someone who knew. Despite the attention, Titan and Bear didn't change. They still stood guard at the crib, still rose when the baby cried, still flanked the stroller. On every walk, the world now knew what the Harpers had discovered all along. These weren't just dogs. They were guardians. They were family. And to millions of people across the country, they were something more, hope, with fur and for legs. By age 3, Ella was already different. Not in a way that worried her parents, in a way that made them pause, watch, and quietly marvel. While other toddlers fought tantrums, shouted through frustration, and bounced wildly through preschool, Ella moved like someone who carried something older in her heart. She was soft-spoken, gentle, watchful. The teachers at preschool called her the quiet oak. "She doesn't push," one aide told Sarah. Surprised, she observes, "She's kind but she stands her ground. It's like she understands things before we explain them." Sarah smiled knowingly. She didn't need to explain. Ella's teachers hadn't grown up, with 2 retired police canines south sleeping beside their cribs. They hadn't watched Bear train her in patience, or Titan teach her silence without fear. At home, the transformation was even more obvious. Ella rarely cried when she was upset. Instead, she'd lower her head, sit cross-legged near the front window, and wait, just like Bear used to do when Jason came home late. She wouldn't speak until she'd sorted through her emotions, and then she'd look up with words beyond her age. "I missed you, but I wasn't scared," she once told Jason softly. Bear says wait until the worry passes. She wasn't mimicking words. She was describing a feeling, the kind that came from time spent wrapped in fur, protected by bodies twice her size and hearts 10 times more loyal than most people ever knew. Her pediatrician noticed it, too. "She's emotionally advanced," the doctor remarked during her checkup. "She reads faces with precision, responds with empathy. That's rare." What she didn't know was that Ella had learned these things from eyes that never blinked in panic, only blinked in thought, from tongues that soothed instead of scolded, from massive paws that never knocked over her toys, only steadied them. But no moment captured this bond more than the week Titan fell ill. It started slowly. He moved less, struggled to rise, his appetite faded. The vet diagnosed him with advanced hip dysplasia and signs of heart trouble. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but his age was catching up with him. Ella noticed the change before anyone else. She stopped bouncing down the stairs in the morning. Instead, she'd quietly step over to Titan's bed, lie down beside him, and hum. Always the same song, something soft, wordless, like a lullaby she'd invented just for him. She brought him her toys, her blanket, her morning toast, but most of all, she brought him presents. Jason found her one morning stroking his graying muzzle, whispering, "It's okay to be slow, Titan. I'll be slow, too." That same day, Bear, still strong, still proud, began walking more closely to Ella, as if sensing the shift in balance. Titan had passed the torch, not out of weakness, but out of trust. The pack had restructured. Ella adapted without question. One rainy afternoon, Sarah came home from the grocery store and found Ella sitting near the sliding glass door, watching the downpour. She had her arms wrapped around Bear's neck, her chin resting on his head. "What are you two doing?" Sarah asked gently. Ella didn't turn, listening to the rain. "Bear says it teaches stillness." Sarah blinked back tears. She wasn't sure whether to smile or cry or both. Every day, her daughter became more like the dogs who raised her. Calm, attentive, loyal, strong. Titan eventually recovered enough to walk short distances again, but he no longer led the walks. Bear stayed close to Ella's side like a shadow, and Titan followed quietly behind, his steps slower but proud. The little girl who once used their backs to stand was now the one gently guiding them, speaking softly, moving patiently, never rushing. Jason sometimes stood in the doorway and watched them move across the yard, child between two warriors, now aging, now gray, but never wavering. "She's got their heart," he once whispered to Sarah. "No," she replied, brushing a tear from her cheek. "She is their heart." Titan's breathing had grown slower, now deeper, heavier, like each inhale required more thought than the last. His walks had become shorter, and some days he didn't get up at all. Bear still had energy, but even he had started to sleep longer, stretching his old joints before lying down again. They were no longer the strong, fearsome sentries of years past, but they were still sentries, always watching, always waiting, always near Ella. She was 5 now, bright-eyed, curious, and still remarkably calm. The chaos of childhood never fully touched her. She approached life like a quiet observer, always thinking before speaking, always offering kindness before complaint. She still fed Titan his morning treat, still laid her little blanket over his back during nap time. Sarah had started photographing them more, not for the internet this time, not for blog clicks or praise, but because she knew, one afternoon, while Ella was at school, Titan refused to get up. His hind legs trembled. Bear licked his ears and lay beside him. Jason sat down slowly on the floor. "Old boy," he murmured, running his hand over Titan's thick, silver-streaked fur. "You've done enough." When Ella came home that day and saw Titan still lying in the corner of the living room, she didn't cry. She sat beside him, tucked her legs under herself, and leaned against his side. She didn't ask questions, didn't make a sound. She just stayed, for hours. That night, Titan passed in his sleep, peacefully, softly, with Bear lying beside him, and Ella's small hand still resting on his shoulder. Jason buried him beneath the old oak tree in their backyard. He wrapped him in Ella's favorite baby blanket, the one he used to guard when she was still in the crib. They placed his old badge, worn from time and memory, inside the bundle. Ella helped place the first scoop of earth on the grave. Then she knelt beside it and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." She never needed help finding words for him. Bear changed after that. He aged fast, more than Jason or Sarah expected. His energy faded like a tide going out. He still followed Ella from room to room, but at a slower pace now. Like every step held weight. It was on Ella's 6th birthday, nearly a year after Titan passed, that Bear did something unexpected. After everyone had left and the balloons began to sag, Bear walked slowly to the hallway and stood in the nursery, the one Ella hadn't slept in for years. He sniffed the air once, then lay down beneath the window where Titan used to guard. Ella found him there, curled tight, his tail tapping once against the floor. She climbed into his bed and curled against him, just like she had years ago. And they stayed like that until the stars blinked on. 2 months later, Bear passed too. Jason and Sarah didn't need to explain anything to Ella. She knew. She carried his leash to the oak tree herself, and she stood between the two mounds of earth, between two guardians who had shaped her into the girl she had become. She didn't cry right away. Instead, she turned to her parents and said, "They're still here. They're just not barking anymore." Years passed. The house grew quieter. New shoes replaced little ones. Toys gave way to books. But one thing never changed. The space beneath the oak tree was always kept neat. Fresh flowers, a blanket on warm afternoons. Sometimes Ella would read there. Other times she'd just sit. When she turned 10, she asked for a very specific birthday gift. A German Shepherd puppy. She named him Valor. And the first night he came home, she whispered in his ear, "You don't have to protect me. I already learned from the best. I'll protect you now." The cycle began again. Different dog, same legacy. Because though Titan and Bear had passed, their mission lived on, not in the strength of their bodies, but in the quiet courage they left behind in the heart of one little girl. And no matter how far she went in life, one thing remained true. She had been chosen, and she had been loved. Always her first.